Sometimes it's like I'm watching myself. Like I'm outside.
Ka hoi hoi ngā reo. E tauronarona ana.
The challenges I face. The decisions I make. Should I?
Me pērā.
I want to be.
They want me to be.
I pretend to be.
be.
But if I listen harder,
Ka rongo.
I hear myself. Navigating the DMs. The conversations with my kaiako.
Te tautoko mai a taku whānau.
It's connected.
And I can take a breath.
And then I'm inside. Standing, feet firm on the ground.
Me he pou.
Strong, proud, grounded.
Te mahoi.
From here I can go anywhere. Find my own path.
Tōku tuakiritanga.
Whatever comes,
I know myself.
I am ready.
Kia ora everybody, and welcome to our webinar on tackling teen vaping and strategies for schools to support proactive and positive responses to young people. We're absolutely thrilled to have you here today, and we're even more thrilled with our amazing panel that we have got here today. So I'd really like to welcome Dr. Jude Ball, Sarah Guy and Darren Atkinson, and also to Mokai Morgan. My name is Annabelle Prescott and I'm from New Zealand Drug Foundation and particularly working on the 2 to 3 project. Some tikanga for today's webinar. Just want to let you know that the webinar will be available on our YouTube channel and also up on our website after our live stream. So feel free to access this from there afterwards. If you are watching this on your phone, please just be aware that some of the the research content is rather dense and may look a little bit very small to read on your phone. So feel free to access it via our website later on. Also, we are really keen to have a very robust kōrero with you today. What we are aspiring to do is make sure that we get to your questions. Our backup plan, if we can't answer all your questions, is that we will release a document on our website that will answer all of the questions that come through Q&A. So the purpose of today's webinar is really to discuss the facts and the context for youth vaping here in Aotearoa, give an overview of national policy settings, and talk about some of the innovative ways that we have seen schools respond to students vaping. So thank you very much for being here. Tūturu is a national program that is delivered across 5 main areas in New Zealand, and we are overseen by Ministry of Education, Te Whatu Ora, and we've also got the New Zealand Police as part of our governance group. So we're thrilled that they're overseeing us and supporting not only on the ground responses, but also systemic change to ensure that we can have proactive health-based responses to students struggling with alcohol or drugs. We've also done a reasonable amount of work, and we're really thrilled to have worked with Te Whatu Ora on a document called Let's Clear the Air, which is a guidance document targeting schools. Now this document is focusing on supporting schools and how they respond. It covers pastoral responses. It also covers tips and ideas for whānau, and looks at guiding schools in regards to their policy responses. So I would really encourage you to access this resource. It is available from the website, which is the next slide, please. Sorry, and this, yes, thanks Tech in the background. This is where the Let's Clear the Air is available for you to access. So thank you for that. It is now my real pleasure to welcome Dr. Jude Ball. Jude is affiliated with Aspire Aotearoa and also the Adolescent Health Research Group. Jude is going to talk through us some of the emerging trends and latest research in relation to youth vaping. So ngā mihi nui, Jude, for your time today. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. It's great to be here with you. Thank you for the introduction, Annabelle. As Annabelle said, I am a researcher. I've been researching adolescence and substance use for about 10 years now at the University of Otago. And so I'd just like to share a bit of kind of context information before we get into the nitty-gritty of the seminar. So first off, what are e-cigarettes? Well, they're a device that deliver nicotine as an aerosol without the smoke or tar that's in cigarettes, smoked tobacco. They come in lots of different shapes and sizes, but the basic components are pretty similar across vapes. They all have some kind of chamber, or it could be a cartridge or pod that's filled with e-liquid. They have a power source like a battery, which heats a heating element, and an atomizer. So instead of smoke, the user inhales heated aerosol. So despite the name, it's not actually vapor, it's aerosol, which means a mist of tiny droplets. The liquid typically contains nicotine, propylene glycol, vegetable glycerine, and flavorings. And now all of those ingredients, they've typically been used in food for a long time and are known to be safe to eat. But whether they are safe to inhale is another question. So there's ongoing scientific debate about the harms and benefits of vaping relative to smoking, but there's general scientific agreement now that vaping is less dangerous than smoking tobacco. However, it's not safe. It is addictive, and in terms of the relative harm, scientists have studied the e-cigarette aerosol, and based on the chemicals in the aerosol and what's known about them, they've come up with estimates of the relative harmfulness of vaping, which range from about 5% as harmful as tobacco smoking to 30% as harmful. And of course, the long-term risks won't be certain for some time yet. We know for sure that vaping does cause respiratory, cardiovascular, oral health, and mental health harm with young people. And there are kind of downstream harms as well. So, for example, school exclusions, which themselves cause social harm. So, just to summarize, being smoke-free and vape-free is the healthiest option for anyone, and only putting fresh air into your lungs. But for people who smoke and haven't been able to quit, completely switching to vaping will save money and will improve their health. But for young people and non-smokers, vaping is likely to damage their health. So just a few slides to show general trends in New Zealand. So this first graph shows trends for adults, that is people aged 15 plus from the New Zealand Health Survey. And as you can see there, over the past just over 10 years, smoking has been steadily decreasing. And that's the black line. And in the green line, you can see that initially vaping wasn't very common among adults at all. And then suddenly from 2020, it started increasing quite sharply. And at the same time, the proportion of people who are smoking decreased quite sharply. So of course it's correlation and not causation, but on the face of it, it looks like for adults, the increase in vaping from 2020 is associated with a decrease in smoking, but not in that earlier period. But New Zealand has paid quite a high price for that success. We have got the highest youth vaping rates in the world. So this slide shows vaping among 15 to 17-year-olds from the same survey. So as you can see, daily smoking was already very low in this age group before vaping came along, and there has been a dramatic increase in vaping since 2017-18, and particularly since 2020. So you can see the same inflection point there where vaping suddenly took off. So I think what we see in that graph and this one is that among younger people, vaping isn't displacing smoking. Rather, most of the young people taking up vaping are not people who smoked and would never have smoked. So this graph shows the younger age group again, Year 10 students from the ASH Year 10 snapshot survey. So you can see the point that I want to make with this graph is that back in 2015, there were a lot of young people experimenting with vaping. So the bar on the left is ever tried, but only about 1 in 20 at that stage were vaping every day. Whereas if we go fast forward to 2022, about 40% had ever tried and 10% were vaping every day. So that's 1 in 4 conversion rate to daily vaping. So again, a change after 2020. And why? It's because the vapes themselves have changed. Oh, we're missing a slide. Can you go back? Or is it gone completely? It's gone completely. Okay, not to worry. So basically, vapes have evolved over time. So when they were first on the market in New Zealand's 2017-18, they really weren't that good at delivering nicotine. And as a result of that, they weren't particularly satisfying for smokers who wanted to switch to an alternative. So a lot of people tried them and gave up. And for young people as well, it was something fun to try, but they were unlikely to get hooked. So very few of them became daily vapers. But that changed. The two big changes is that disposable vapes arrived. So suddenly it was really cheap. So rather than just sharing in a social situation, every kid could afford to have their own vape. And the nicotine salt technology came along, which meant that higher nicotine vapes were possible because they don't have this. With nicotine salts, it's not as harsh on your throat at high nicotine levels. So suddenly we had these very cheap, high nicotine vapes available, and that's where we see both an increase in youth vaping and also more success with adults using vaping to quit. So to understand fully why youth vaping has taken off so strongly in Aotearoa, we also have to look at the regulatory environment. So the New Zealand government was very slow compared to other countries to have vaping-specific legislation. And there was a period between May 2018 and November 2020 when there was really no regulation at all. And that's because the Ministry of Health lost a court case in May 2018. They took Philip Morris to court and lost, and that meant a reinterpretation of our existing law at that stage. So the industry really went to town and made the most of this unregulated period. I don't know if you guys remember, but there was vaping advertising on TV, on billboards. Vape companies were sponsoring music festivals and youth events, and they were very clearly targeting towards a youth market. In November 2020, vape-specific laws came into play, and so advertising of e-cigarettes was outlawed. But the industry is still able to market its products as a fashionable lifestyle accessory through the design of its stores, its products and packaging. As you can see in those pictures, very sleek, minimalist designs, colours that are really attractive to young people. I led a study back in 2022 talking to high school students about their experiences with vaping and other things. And a key theme that came across is that most young people tried vaping via their friends, and they described the smells and flavors as being really enticing. Social media videos of people doing vape tricks also made vaping appear fun and cool. As I'm sure anyone working in schools will be aware, depression and anxiety have skyrocketed in New Zealand youth since about 2012. Next slide, please. And one of the reasons vaping is so popular is that many young people, oops, we've lost a slide, or perhaps not. Okay, sorry. Too many words on my slide, I think. So as I was saying, one of the reasons that vaping has become so popular with young people is that it is perceived to help with stress and distress. So in our interviews with young people, they talked about using vaping as a coping mechanism. For example, one young person said, "I vape if I'm stressed out or having a bad time. I like to think about it as a reset because it just resets your mood completely. It calms you down." Some people even talked about vaping as a coping mechanism to help them stop self-harming. So in some cases, young people are really quite distressed and see vaping as something that helps, but it's very important for this audience to understand and to pass on to young people that the science is quite clear that in the medium to long term, nicotine can actually harm mental health. It can have a negative effect on anxiety and mood disorders. So it's really important that young people understand that it might feel like it's helping, but actually it's making things worse. So what next? So there is new regulation on the horizon. Part of the New Zealand First Coalition Agreement with National was to repeal the amendments to the Smoke-Free Environments Act that's already happened. They also had an agreement to reform the regulation of vaping, smokeless tobacco and oral nicotine products, and ban disposables, and increase penalties for illegal sales. So there's some stronger regulations in the pipeline for vapes, but I just wanted to highlight the potential here for smokeless tobacco and oral nicotine products to be legalised. They're not currently legal to sell in New Zealand. These products are things like chewing tobacco and snus. They've been around for a long time, but there's new tobacco-free oral nicotine products. They've just come out in the last 4 or 5 years, and the tobacco industry are pushing them really hard. Like vaping products, they come in a range of colours and flavours, and they're being marketed directly to young people. So people like me are concerned that legalising these products could further, we've already got a problem with young people being addicted to nicotine, and legalising these products could make it worse. So yeah, the marketing of oral nicotine, much like vapes, they've got lots of fun colours and flavours, attractive packaging. Tobacco industry are paying influencers to market them online via TikTok and Instagram. They're being marketed as performance enhancing, so something to use before your workout or something to help you study. So this is a really concerning development, and we just wanted to make sure you're aware, if you're not already, there are young people certainly interested in these products, and they are trickling into New Zealand. Potentially they may be legalised in the near future. So that's it from me. I'll hand back to Annabelle.
Oh, thank you so much, Jude. I really appreciated the time. Sorry we were missing some of your slides there.
Not to worry.
I think what continues to concern me is the trend for young people that they experience because of the lack of protections that are there, and in particular that growing body of evidence around the relationship between nicotine use and either self-soothing behaviours but that not having a good long-term trajectory for our young people. So thank you very much just for bringing in the latest evidence, increasing our knowledge in regards to what we could forecast happening in regards to the oral nicotines, and it's a really good thing for us just to be conscious of and think about how we can proactively respond to that. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I just really want to encourage everybody to be putting in your comments or questions throughout. It'll just help us manage our time really effectively towards the end when we get to our Q&A. So now I'd really like to welcome Darren and Sarah. Darren is the General Manager at Youth Law, and Sarah is the Education and Engagement Manager at Youth Law, both of whom are massive champions for great outcomes for young people from both a policy and advocacy and supporting young people to know how to advocate for themselves. So I was really thrilled that you accepted our invite to join us on this webinar. So thank you so much for your time and looking forward to your kōrero. So hand over to you both.
Awesome, Annabelle. Thank you so much for that overly generous introduction, probably. But no, pleasure to be here. And kia ora e te whānau, with the whānau being, I guess, a whole bunch of people in our community that want better outcomes for young people, hey? So we're just going to talk a little bit today about what we hear at Youth Law Aotearoa, some of the stories a little bit, and some of the projections, the ripple effects or consequences, and maybe some different strategies or some things to consider when dealing with young people in vaping. Darren, feel free to jump in at any point. You good? But Youth Law Aotearoa has been around for sort of over 30 years, and in the last 4 or 5 particularly, the word vapes and vaping has a huge increase, more prevalent in matters that we hear. We hear nationwide from our advice line, from rangatahi in schools all around the country, but also the education engagement, which is the face-to-face work, where we really get to hear the nitty-gritty, what's going on, some of the frustrations, and how things are really working. Because quite often, what the law is and where reality sits, there's a little bit of a mismatch. And just knowing what the law is and being clear on our position in that can really help us navigate our decision-making through there. So for education in particular, education makes up around about almost a quarter of the work that Youth Law does, probably because it's a huge place and space where young people spend their time. So there's lots of things going through there. And with the education, it could also be employment as well, but we hear the vaping has those ripple effects, but there's a loss of opportunity in how we're dealing with the act of vaping. Quite often, our young people are in legal situations prematurely, and asking why these situations are occurring or why the behaviour is occurring is really important to get those really genuine outcomes with long-lasting impact. We hear that the disciplinary method or the disciplinary process through an education system is quite often used for vaping. And I think there's just a few questions in there. It is not the only way to deal with what's going on, but it is one vehicle, I guess, that has been used. And so I guess when we're addressing the underlying causes and what's happening with vaping, when we use the punitive measures to diminish a harm, are we in turn causing more harm? Are we using a process that's going to have long-lasting impacts? Because what we really want in this situation is for that young person to make a choice not to vape from intrinsic motivation. So when we're asking these questions like where does the ultimate responsibility sit? In general law, we have a lot of sort of purchase and supply laws, but the consumption laws are a little bit different. We need to sort of ask, is this an effective choice? What are we, if we're taking something away from a student, what are we replacing it with, or what support are we giving through there? So as I mentioned in the Education and Training Act, this is just one of the methods that schools could use, I guess, in dealing with vaping. We do see it used a lot. And where the better outcomes are is the conversation around what is actually happening. As I've mentioned just previously, knowing the whys really impacts the outcome. For example, I think Jude mentioned as well, stress and anxiety is a huge level, or a huge reason. And it diminishes a young person's stress level from what the stories that we're hearing. If we take that coping mechanism directly away, or we use a punitive measure, are we then causing more stress, which is going to exacerbate a problem? So some considerations about effective ways to go about this, having those conversations, working out the whys and the best practices around that. If I'm thinking about the vaping and the stories that I've heard from young people, I just need to go out and have a vape, and it's really about being mindful about your breathing, because the vaping doesn't actually take away the anxiety. It's more of a coping mechanism through it. So it's just being very conscious about some of these things. And I would also like to just acknowledge, I guess, the complexities that schools have to deal with. There's so many, it's complex and overlapping some considerations in a school environment. So you've got the Education and Training Act, which says you need to ensure the students' physical and emotional safety. But if we're making a decision to look after our students' physical safety, it can't be at the detriment to their emotional safety. There are other considerations, for example, the Privacy Acts, I think. So if schools are putting in systems of cameras in bathrooms to look at where the vaping's occurring and maybe those responsible for it, are we causing sort of those emotional vulnerabilities for the other students to make sure that we've got everything in check? So one can't be to the detriment of another. And it is a complicated and tough job. But sometimes we've got to think, where is the fight? Where does the fight need to be fought? So just about the stand down suspensions quickly. They are used a lot. And a point that I just want to make is that even though we may have a school rule or a school policy that says no vaping and no smoking, if we have a direct outcome for that, so like if you're caught vaping, you will be stood down. That is actually against what's in the Education and Training Act by allowing the act of natural justice. And what natural justice really is there for is to provide a fair process for our young people. An example of that is when we've had some bullying situations, or some really the whys of why things are happening, or there are implements in someone's bag. It's about that peer pressure and bullying. It could have been put there by someone else as well. And that young person needs to explain, look, what led them to that situation. So by having an automatic suspension or an automatic stand down because of a broken rule, that actually goes against what's in the Education and Training Act. So we need to make sure that for every individual, we're going through a process of making it fair, letting a student have their say, so we can come up with the best outcome for that. I'm probably speaking it a little bit too much. Darren, I'm not sure. The third thing I just want to bring some attention to, and as Jude mentioned in their studies, correlation and causation. Just because it says there's a lot of studies to say that being stood down or suspended is an indicator to working, going towards youth justice, it's not always the cause. It's not saying that everybody who is stood down is then going to go move to youth justice, but it is a consideration and an indicator, and young people are more likely. And the reason for that is because of generally the disengagement, the disillusionment, or the disses, or the disconnection, that social isolation, and where young people are making different choices. If those social harms are starting to become more prevalent, then our young people sort of move to sort of some negative behaviours and environments as well. I think that mainly is the main thing. Apart from one last thing is, we often talk in the justice or the youth justice sector about there's a pipeline from young people who are involved in the justice sector are more likely to be involved in the adult sector, youth justice sector. But there is a little, this correlation prior, that young people who are in the disciplinary process or have been excluded from schools are more likely to be involved in youth justice. So I just wanted to put that out there, that there's enough evidence out there to show that disconnection and disengagement from their social and their schooling does have some really long-term harms and some long-term consequences or things to consider. So it may seem like a very quick solution at the time for an individual young person, but it can have some really, really big impacts later on. So really looking at what is the most effective decision in this vaping situation. How can we best move this forward? what are we empowering our students with, are really questions we need to ask in every single young person situation. Mr. Darren, you've got some ideas around this.
Thank you, Sarah. I think I've got the next slide. Yeah, cool. Yeah, kia ora koutou. Darren H. Sanaho. I am the General Manager at Youth Law. I'm going to confess that I don't have a lot of experience around or expertise on vaping and smoke-free legislation. I'm quite new to this role, and I don't even have much knowledge on education law, but I've been around community law centres and working as a lawyer for 20 years and around community law centres for about 15 years. What I do have is quite a lot of experience, I suppose, in observing how and analysing how laws impact and affect communities. And I just want to talk about that a little bit when we're thinking about strategies for schools. Not so much on the student level, because the other speakers today have a lot more experience about that, and all of you people listening will have a lot more experience than I do around that. But thinking about it at a kind of global society type level, what I'm seeing in this space is quite a lot of alignment in part of the puzzle. So we've got the health sector really pushing for well-being and the health of young people. So in the work that Jude's been doing, alerting us to the dangers of vaping and all of that sort of thing. We've also got the education sector pushing in very much in an aligned direction. It's about the well-being of young people. It's about keeping them in education, not putting them into the school to prison pipelines. We've got government coming out saying, right, we've got to make sure that we keep these young people in schools, and we improve our attendance and all of that sort of thing. Smoke-free legislation, your school environments have got to be smoke-free, vape-free. This is all great stuff pushing in one direction. But what we've done is created an environment where we've basically allowed an addictive product to come into the market, and it's pushing in completely the opposite direction. So you've got it's a lawful product. It causes harm to young people. It causes problems for schools. So it aggravates and kind of pushes against all of the great things that health and education are trying to achieve. And I guess what my message really is that the schools and the health sector has a huge voice. And has a huge political voice, and really I encourage you to use that voice to push for better regulation in this area. Essentially, we've got one bunch of laws pushing in one direction, a whole lot of others pushing in really good directions. I think it's a little bit like, I was talking to Sarah about it the other day, it feels a little bit like the gun lobby and the gun situation in the US. You've got a dangerous product in the market, which the schools are being required to manage by having security guards on the door, looking through people's bags, all of this sort of stuff, when the obvious solution is to cut the supply of the products in the first place. And, thinking about the government's messaging around education and health, they want the same outcomes as the school and health. And, I think that we just need to be, as a collective, saying that this vaping industry does not align with all of the other policy goals that we really have together. So I'd encourage you to, particularly the peak bodies, Principals Association, the boards, the Board of Trustees Association, those sorts of organisations to, think about how we can collectively come together and push in the right direction to get some better regulation. That's it from me, really. Quite high level stuff, but yeah, thank you for the opportunity to come here and pitch at you. Kia ora.
Nice.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Darren and Sarah. I feel like this space is really fraught, and I think you've really highlighted a number of the tensions, both from a school level perspective, but at the higher level around broader legislation that we are grappling with how to move through what can feel sometimes quite contradictory or confusing. So I'm really aware that if I'm confused as an adult, I don't understand how young people navigate this. I really want to pick up on that point around principles of natural justice, and think, you know, that's a really important aspect. I've seen comms come out from schools that say, you know, any vaping, it will be an immediate stand down. And, you know, I think your point, and the point that was made by Jude around that actually we really are seeing with vaping that it is a way through the door for help and support, and what sits behind that is actually a real clustering of a number of risks, or, you know, traditional youth health risk behaviours. And so how we then apply a broader conversation that really focuses on looking at those principles of natural justice guiding the process so we can more adequately respond, I think, is really vital in this space. So thanks for bringing that to the forefront. I think when we get to Q&A, I'd really love to hear some more thoughts from you around how a person might advocate for those principles of natural justice to be responded to, particularly when there is such a kind of sometimes quick response within a school setting, or what supports we can give to a school that could maybe slow down that process so a broader inquiry could occur. So flagging that that's already my question for you.
Well, no,
So thank you very much for your time. It is also my again, my privilege. I just feel like I'm living in privilege right now of all the awesome people that I'm hanging out with on this webinar, to introduce you to Tamokai Morgan, who is the National Operations Manager for Tūturu. Tamokai is going to really look at what is some of the ways that schools are responding, and with a particular focus on those pastoral responses, how we support young people to address their health issue while retaining them in education. So also just another little plug, put your questions in the comments. We've got time to have a great kōrero around some of the questions that you've got. But in the meantime, I'll hand over to Tamokai. Thank you so much, Tamokai.
Awesome. Kia ora, Annabelle. Tēnā tātou katoa. It's lovely to be here, and we appreciate you all carving out some time this afternoon to engage in this kōrero. We all understand that schools face significant pressure to address a number of challenges, of which vaping is one of them. Oftentimes, though, what this can look like is a resorting to familiar and sometimes short-term solutions. And I think what this does is it highlights the need for alternative responses to vaping in particular, but also broader youth health-related challenges as well, that ensure our young people can remain engaged in school for as long as possible. Next slide, please. Stand downs and suspensions. I think this slide flows nicely from Sarah and Darren's kōrero, in particular current responses to vaping and the interplay with keeping students engaged and present in school, regardless of the behaviour. If we're referring to the graph that's on screen currently, what is being demonstrated here comes from an indicator report that focuses on disciplinary action and the impact, in recent times at least, that our responses can have, and also the proportion of disciplinary responses in relation to vaping behaviour, and how this can influence other aspects within the school and further beyond as well. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so examples of what some schools are doing. The core of this segment will be focused on how schools have responded to this challenge, specifically responses at a communal level, so amongst schools, school-led and student-led as well. I'd also like to flag that I appreciate the examples we will be running through will be brief in nature due to our time constraints this afternoon. Next slide, please. So collective interest. If we dive into this example, what we were looking at was, let me set the scene. So we've got several schools within a particular area were experiencing their own challenges related to vaping. This interest was used as the springboard for connection, and as a result, a combined event took place where schools could engage with each other, where they could share experiences and figure out solutions together. So what we have is we've brought people together. So what does this look like, and how do you harness that collective interest? In this example, a segmentation approach was used. Some of you may be familiar with that model. However, I'll do a brief overview of it. Essentially, this is a method of identifying groups of people to address needs and patterns of behavior. And they also give us a really useful opportunity to think critically about who these students are and use this information to develop well-being strategies. The following models were used in this example, and we'll start here with peer crowds. So that may be familiar to some on the webinar here today. So peer crowds are those social groups of young people with shared interests, styles, and behaviors. And these aspects often shape their identities and their interactions. For example, what you could loosely term as the mainstream group of students, or the popular bunch, or those that don't want to be seen as either. There are far more than the three just mentioned. However, this should give you an idea around the process here. Boundaries, specifically how students respond to boundaries, and what we're talking about here are those school rules, the policies, and the regulations within your schooling environment. Essentially, what this particular approach was looking at was trying to figure out how students navigate these boundaries, ranging from boundaries being well understood and minimal enforcement being required, right through to students who may bump into these boundaries more regularly, and then the ensuing response becoming more tailored as a result. The third model there was a vaping matrix. And although this is mostly used when there is a health issue, what it's aiming to look at is motivations and behavior. For example, students who do vape, those who don't, those who want to, and those who don't want to. And trying to discern the overlap, if there is any, between the substance and the desire to use said substance. It's important to note here, and referencing back to Annabelle's comment, that vaping may just be one of many behaviors going on at any one time, although that may just be what is top of mind for you, or the behavior that presents to you in the moment. Having briefly gone through those examples, what would be the takeaway message here? I think first off, as staff, as leaders in schools and part of that wider community, you are not alone. And that together with support from your peers and counterparts at other schools, we can collaborate to understand the student behaviors, prioritize well-being here, and use tailored strategies to address vaping effectively. If we had to reframe this into a strategy tagline of sorts, what could this look like? And synthesizing all of that piece, it was understand, support, transform, tailored strategies for student well-being. And what are we talking about here? So when we're leaning into understand, this is the behavior, what it is, where it comes from, and ultimately what is the root cause that underpins that behavior, because there's usually a reason, and it may be that what we're seeing is just the symptom of that underlying reason, and it happens to present in this particular form, for example, vaping. Support. This refers to the overall well-being of our students, and transform. This is leaning into using those tailored strategies to create meaningful change in behaviors and overall school culture, and in particular transforming the approach to not just vaping, but in this case vaping, to ensure those long-term and positive outcomes there. Next slide, please. So looking at school-led withdrawal management. So this next example will highlight a scenario that it may be familiar to our viewers today, and it may be something that you are grappling with currently. And the example would be a group of students engaging in vaping-related behavior, and they are at risk of disengagement from school. So the question is, what can we do about that? Fundamentally, we want our young people to remain engaged in school, but I do acknowledge that this can be a really tricky space to navigate, and alternatives are not always at hand or easy to grasp for us. We are aware that current methods may not be working as effectively as we would hope, yet there is a tension around the need to respond in the moment and looking forward as well. So how can we pivot accordingly here? A few examples, well, following this example, was really leaning into engaging with those at-risk students, getting to know them rather than their behavior. And I do understand that's a tricky spot, because the behavior is often what you're engaging with on a day-to-day basis. Understanding their motivation, the why behind it all, because again, there is always a why. It may not be something that we agree with or support or condone, but there's going to be a why somewhere, and getting to the core of that would really help any ongoing action. Exploring alternatives, utilizing their insight, and this is the students in that example. Alternative perspectives can be hugely beneficial for a wide variety of things, but in particular related to student behavior around vaping, for example. And also collaboratively create those balanced solutions. So striking a balance between all of the bits that have been spoken about previously, and forging a path together between you as the staff, as the school, and with the students who attend. And so what was the outcome of this process? What came about was a targeted withdrawal management pack for those students, developed with them and for them. Essentially a toolkit to allow them to stay engaged in class with what they need, and the staff around them understanding why all of this was going on. So that shared sense of understanding and awareness. What were some of the flow-on effects of this? Improved attendance and engagement. So that's, students spending more time in class, more effective time in class too, I might add. Stronger sense of connection, students feeling seen and heard, and the creation of usable examples. So we're not starting from square one the next time this happens. What would be the takeaway message here? I think it'd be, engaging with at-risk students to collaboratively create those effective solutions. And if we go to that strategy tagline here, collaborate, engage, retain, empowering students to stay connected and engaged. Collaborate, this is the importance of working together across the school for that unified approach. Engage, this is around actively involving students in the process. We know engagement is key to understanding their needs, their motivations and perspectives, and making them partners in finding those solutions as well. And retain, this emphasizes that shared goal around keeping students in school and engaged in their education. And I think this is something we can all relate to, especially around how crucial that can be going forward for them in their lives. Next slide, please. All right, student-led support, peer support. So what can happen when students are able to share that knowledge and insight beyond their peer groups? And this example taps into that a little bit here. So we know that more support options for our students is going to be a net positive within the school. We are aware that the success of an approach or a solution for one group potentially could transfer over to others, but we understand the tension there around the adult-led aspect versus the student-led aspect, and trying to strike a balance there as well. So how can we pivot accordingly here if we use this as our example? So using those positive examples of school-led support, if it's worked well, how can we benefit from that momentum rather than letting it be a one and done type situation? Applying those learnings to a broader student base, we know the benefits can be applied elsewhere with a bit of tinkering, with a bit of work, and some solid drive to try and get it to translate into other spaces. And fostering leadership development following a tricky situation, you'd probably call it. So turning these into intentional learning opportunities. And I do understand that is much easier said than done. However, being able to reframe that process and funnel that energy and that interest would be hugely beneficial. So what was the outcome of this process? It was the development of peer support groups for students experiencing vaping-related challenges. And what were some of the flow-on effects of this particular example, similar to those mentioned previously, but also I'd add the addition of students taking ownership for not just their own well-being, but that of their peers as well. What would be the takeaway message here? Empowering students where possible to lead that peer-to-peer support, fostering the support networks, that leadership development, and that stronger sense of belonging and responsibility here. And if we drop back into that tagline, I promise this is the last time we'll be doing that for my segment anyway. Empower, support, lead, building those peer networks for well-being. If we're looking at empower, this is giving students the confidence and tools to take the initiative with the support of the adults in their system. Support focuses on the mutual assistance and understanding that peer networks can provide, and the safer environments that they ultimately contribute to within the school. And lead, this highlights the role of students in guiding and mentoring their peers through this and utilizing their previous successes and transferring that on to others. So hopefully the brief run through has provided you all with some insight and hopefully some inspiration around alternative ways to engage with this topic. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Annabelle.